Hi friends, this is Cindy Lyon from Greetings and Memories, sharing instructions for creating a cute and simple card with our Whale Done photopolymer stamp set, which is part of the Whale of a Time suite of products from Stampin' Up. For those of you who are taking part in the World Card Making Day event, you would have received your little supply packet in the mail. And in there, we have a Whisper White medium envelope that we'll set aside for the time being. You have a Whisper White thick cardstock card base. And you have a layer pre-cut for you in the Whisper White. And then just a scrap of Whisper White that we'll use for stamping our whale and our sentiment. And a length of pool party ribbon. And you also would have a sheet of Stampin' Dimensionals that came with your supplies too. So this one is pretty simple. Like I said, we're using the Whale Done stamp set. The only adhesive you actually need for this card are the Stampin' Dimensionals. We don't need any liquid glue or Stampin' Seal for this one. We'll be cutting out that whale with the Whale Builder punch if you have it. If you don't have the punch, that's okay. You just go ahead and freehand cut it with a pair of sharp scissors. And for inks, we're using Granny Apple Green, Pool Party, and Night of Navy for this project. Oh, and of course we have our clear Stampin' Block. And just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to be using the D block for all of my stamping, even though some of these would certainly fit on a smaller block if you wanted to do it that way. But to start off with, we're going to move that layer aside and we're going to be stamping directly on our card base with the little school of fish here. Sorry, that's kind of noisy, isn't it? Okay, and I'm just gonna position that in the middle of my block there. And what we're doing is we're gonna stamp a row of those fish in the Night of Navy, oh, maybe 3/4 of an inch or so from the bottom, because we just want them to peek out once we place our other layer on top of there. So let me get my navy ink pad going here. And I'm going to let that go ahead and hang off of the edge a little bit onto my grid paper. And we'll turn that around so some of the fish point the other direction. And that's all the stamping we're doing on that layer. So we're going to just move that out of the way. Go ahead and clean this and put it away. And before we put that navy ink pad away, we'll go ahead and grab our scrap paper and stamp our whale. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to move that out of the way. That's the lanyard strap from my phone that I'm using to record. Okay, so now we're gonna just stamp that towards one end of our little cardstock scrap there. I'll swap that out and grab the Thanks a Ton stamp. I'm just going to stamp that at the end of my scrap here. Oh, did you hear my shoulder pop when I pushed down on that? Oh, the joys of having EDS. Okay. And we'll set that aside along with our card base. And we'll close up the navy because we're done with that. And we'll move on to stamping our layer there. So I'm going to open up my Granny Apple Green. If you notice, this is our new designed stamp pad. And they've changed that just to make it a little easier to store, and it's also easier to stack. You've got some the little dots there and the little dots there, so you can stack those up. So they're a little bit different shape than our older style. But anyway, so I want to take this long seaweed looking piece from my stamp set here. And like I said, I'm using that D size block, and it doesn't fit on there this way, so I'm going to run it diagonally. And I'm doing that because I have several new stampers participating in my virtual event, and I didn't want everybody to have to buy a whole bunch of blocks. I wanted you to be able to just have 1 or 2 blocks to start. So now that I've got that on there, I'm going to ink that up, and I'm going to stamp a couple of seaweed pieces on here. I'm going to go ahead and stamp that again without re-inking it, and you see what happens there is I get a little bit lighter color. And I'm going to clean that off. And I'm going to switch over to my Pool Party ink. I'm not closing that green one up yet because we'll use that again. But now I'm going to ink that seaweed piece up with the Pool Party ink. And we'll add a couple of that on there. A little shorter one. And I think I'll re-ink and do another impression with the full. Okay. And now we're really going to just kind of fill that in with whatever stamps you would like to use. You'll see on my sample here, I've got a turtle, but you know what? I'm going to just be different this time and stamp a jellyfish instead. So I'm going to ink that jellyfish up with the Pool Party. You can see you can barely see that color on the stamp, but layer them here with the seaweed. And again, it's just kind of fill that area in with whichever images from that set you would like to use. I think I'm going to add me a little seahorse in there. And I'm going to do him in the Granny Apple Green. Oh, you notice what I was just doing there. I like to stamp on my grid paper and get kind of the excess ink off first before I go over to my Stampin' Scrub pad. And that just helps keep my scrub pad from getting dirty so quick. And there we go. Add me a little school of fish in there in the Granny Apple Green. And you notice with those fish, you can stamp them either direction. Just turn your block. It doesn't really, they don't really seem to have a top and bottom. So I'm just gonna kind of add those guys in there. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these little bubble or speckles or whatever you want to call them there. I tend to think of them as bubbles. I'm going to ink those with the Pool Party ink and just kind of fill in the white spaces. And I'm going to stamp multiple times without re-inking, and you'll see that I get different tones of the blue. And kind of, like I said, kind of turn it and twist it. I need some filled in along the side there. Oh, and I must have had ink on my fingers and got some little spots there. So we'll stamp over the top of that to disguise it a little bit. And I don't know, maybe I'll do a little bit more right there. And then you'll see I want some bubble looking stamps up in the upper right hand side there to be above where I'm going to later place my whale. So kind of add some of those on there too. And that's good enough for that. Oh, the stamping is done now. Put my little bubble stamp back on the sheet so I don't misplace it. And close up my ink pads. Okay, so now what we want to do, the next step, we're going to take our length of Pool Party sheer ribbon and wrap that around our stamped layer there. And we're going to tie a little knot towards the left-hand side here. And of course, because I'm doing that on camera, I'm fumbling. Okay. And then I'm going to take my snips and kind of trim those down a little shorter. I'm going to slide that down a little bit. Okay, and then, like I said, the only adhesive we need for this card is our Stampin' Dimensionals. So I'm going to do those. I always want to make sure I put one in each corner. And then I'll go back and add a few more just to make sure it's not going to cave in. Bring that card base back. And then kind of eyeball that and make it straight and more or less centered. Push down those dimensionals and see how we have our little navy fish just kind of peeking out from under the edge. And now I'm going to take the whale and the greeting that we had done earlier. And I'm just going to cut the greeting and put a couple of Stampin' Dimensionals on the back. And I'm going to adhere that towards the upper left. And then with our whale, if you have the Whale Builder punch, you can punch it with that. If you don't, then go ahead and cut it out with your scissors. But since I have the punch, I'm going to use it to get that in there, placed evenly. And put a couple of dimensionals on the back of this guy. And then I kind of want his tail overhanging our stamped layer. And place him so he looks like those bubbles are coming out of his blowhole there. And voila, we are done. Now you could certainly add some stamped images to the inside of your card if you wanted to. Maybe put a school of fish across the bottom of there, similar to what we did on the front, or add some seaweed or whatever you'd like to do on the inside. And same with the envelope. Maybe you want to put a little whale in the bottom corner of the front, or, you know, stamp some seaweed or fish on the flap. Kind of use your imagination and embellish your envelope to go with your card. But thanks again for joining me. If you are participating in World Card Making Day, you will find the PDF instructions in the files in that group. Otherwise, if you're seeing this later, you will find the instructions on my blog at greetingsandmemory.com. And if you're interested in purchasing any of these Whale of a Time suite of products from Stampin' Up, you can order those at cindylyon.stampinup.net. Thanks for joining me.